So, with that, we are allegedly live. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit off the cuff about something that's maybe a little bit important to me, and also just something which I've never really talked about, and I think is it may be appropriate to a live video. Uh, I don't know how many people are watching. I don't know how many people are subscribed to alerts for my channel, and that's part of the joy of broadcasting live, frankly. So when I get some people tuning in, which, if I'm not mistaken, some people are excited enough for the channel to come on in. Here's the deal. We will be talking about what is it that you do when some of the players, but not all of the players, for a scheduled RPG session, as the game master, or as the host, if you're a player character who's hosting and you're responsible for the venue, what do you do when some of the people show up but others don't? At this point, we are at 1 minute into the video, which seems an opportune time to switch over so that you can look at my beautiful face. I haven't done a live video in a long time, so why not now? So, here's a technique or a strategy that I have not yet shared in a really prepared video on the channel, and it's something which I've often taken for granted, that I've seen as pretty natural in most exploration-based RPGs. This kind where you are hex crawling or you're looking to get to the next dungeon to pick up the next treasure. That sort of thing, where the players drive the action but also have strong feedback from the system about where they should drive the action to. Well, in those sorts of sessions, what do you do when some of the people who you thought were going to show up don't show up? They either call off some number of days before the game, or they are not there when it's time to start the session. And that's going to be the topic of today's stream. That's going to be the topic of this entire video, is a little bit of a discussion about that. So the technique that I've always used in most D&D style gaming, where it's an exploration-based paradigm, is to just say that the players whose characters are not there phase out. It's like they never logged in. It's like they're not there for the day. So all their items are not present, and whatever gear they're carrying is not available to the rest of the party, and whatever plot points that they were involved in are not going to arise or progress while given player is not present. It may be that certain triggers may occur during the course of this session where they're not present that might lead to some of the quests or circumstances that the character is involved in progressing to a point where an NPC will confront them and say, hey, you've done the thing that I was expecting you to do, or that I warned you not to do, and that you really owe me an apology. Or perhaps the NPC says, I really owe you the reward that you were due, even though the character was not there. The timeline of the world that all the characters are present in and all the NPCs are present in has moved forward, and thusly that necessarily means that some things have happened. Triggers can still happen even when you're not there. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is a peculiar thing that I'm beginning to observe with maybe novice players. It could be novice people. It could just be that this is just a normal thing for a lot of people that aren't me. And that would be interesting to find out as well. And that's why I'm going to do this as a live video, to open up the opportunity for discussion and for some community stuff, is to talk about how it seems so surprising to me when people say, well, I just postponed the session. I keep having to postpone the session. I have canceled the session because one or two people said they couldn't come. Now, of course, there are a number of RPGs where this could be an issue. So if we were playing Star Trek Adventures and the player playing the captain character cannot be at the session, and I haven't prepared the session in a way where the captain is out of the picture for one reason or another. Maybe there's a shuttlecraft mission like the Galileo 7. Maybe there's a full-time away team mission where everybody's away from the captain. And there's also signal jamming or subspace interference that prevents people from going back and radioing home. If I haven't prepared for that sort of thing, then, maybe it makes sense. Okay, the captain player isn't here today. I either have to alter my prep or I have to cancel the session because there's some stuff that might happen that the captain player might have something to say about, and as part of their agency, as part of their role in the world that they've not only kind of created, that they deserve because they have a character in the world, and they've also shown up and proven that they really are a person in this game. But, even since they can't be here, maybe we should wait for whatever decision that this character might want to make. And that makes a lot of sense to maybe push off the session. But in a Dungeons and Dragons context, the player characters are on the way to a dungeon to do the thing, or get the treasure, or fight the monster. They've gotten the summons, the adventure hook, the urgency about how the world will end unless we do X, Y, Z. And so the player characters have come to a consensus where they're going to go do the thing. And so they're on their way to do the thing, and then one of the player characters doesn't come. So naturally, in my world, I've always said, okay, well, Jim Bob isn't here today. His character phases out. His dude, Darth Warlius, the druid, is just not present for the day. So whatever gear he was carrying, not there. Whatever hirelings he had hired, whatever loot donkeys were following behind him on the end of a rope, they become ephemeral. They're not there for this session. When Jim Bob returns to our game, all of his stuff returns as if he had been present for the last session, as if he had witnessed all the events of the last session, and all of the loot and gear that Jim Bob was carrying is now back and available with the party. I've always taken this for granted as more or less in an exploration-based paradigm kind of game, like Dungeons and Dragons, to be the default. So, when Jim Bob can't come, when Troy can't attend because he's got yet another graduation party, or there's another ham roast, or whatever it is that we're going to play, the people who want to play today will get to play. The people who are able to show up and like to play D&D are going to get to play D&D. They're not going to have to make extraordinary accommodations and come up with a new adventure, to come up with a new special extra one-shot to interrupt the flow of the activities that we as a group have agreed upon in order to accommodate the person who doesn't come. Now, of course, some people can kind of earn an honored place or earn my trust, earn the group's trust, where, of course, we're going to wait for you. We're going to hold off. We're going to do something else because you're always there. This is really important to your character. It's really important to you as a person, as a member of our community. So, of course, we're going to wait for these momentous moments to share them with you. But in other contexts, one of the things that I see is that people often just postpone the session because whoever can't come today. Now, maybe it has something to do with streaming culture. And I have to acknowledge this, that maybe the audience would be too scrambled by this idea of a character phasing out for the day. That, where is Timotheus? for today. Oh, why can't they use their wizard teleport to surpass this obstacle for the day? And of course, someone in chat will say, well, it's because Timotheus isn't here today. And maybe someone will be indignant and they won't leave their live stream tip, I guess. Now, to my mind, this introduces a little bit of variety to streamed games, in that different challenges will necessarily have to be approached with a different fashion when there isn't a player character with those given abilities. That is to say, if the game master for a streamed game in fact prepared something which is the same in every context, that the world is the way it is, and the characters, whomever they may be, are facing the challenges or the world as it is in front of them, which maybe is not a particularly common assumption. I mean, heck, if I know, really, in these days, I just know that when I was growing up in the RPG hobby, when we were playing Hackmaster in my friend's basement, when I was hosting Hackmaster in my dining room, or wherever we could get together between people's work schedule, people's college classes, and so on, that we wanted to play Hackmaster today, which is a derivative of AD&D First Edition, but it could be anything. It could be Third Edition D&D, which I played a fair amount of too, and I ran a fair number of games. When somebody couldn't be there for the day, their character was just not there. I mean, we assumed that the character was along for the quest. It wasn't like they would have to take any extraordinary measures to return to the quest. It's sort of like somebody had a cold or had to go to the bathroom and they walked away for a bit. And that character is just apart for the session. And that's about how much time the session preoccupied. The number of encounters was sometimes the length of a bathroom break. Sometimes it was the length of a family visit. I need to go to the hospital to visit my sick aunt. And I'll be right back. At higher levels, this could be a thing. Levels 9 to 13 or so. And so a character might disappear to attend to such things, or perhaps as a druid or a cleric to attend to their congregation. And we took this for granted that so-and-so is away for whatever it is that has caused them to be away. And when they want to return, we're not going to double charge them. We're not going to say that so-and-so needs to pay for a scry to scry the party and then pay for a teleport to return to the party. That would be too off-putting. That would say, oh, please don't come back to our D&D game. So, of course, your character is there when you return. In lower-level games, the assumption is usually that if your character is newly arriving, they might be a rescued prisoner. They might have gotten lost down an alternate corridor of the dungeon and are just now rejoining a party. It could be that they are a momentary hostage of the hobgoblins, the orcs, and so on. Or they could be on their own independent quest into the dark dungeon to rescue some civilian characters, some NPCs, and they happen to bump into the player characters in the middle of the adventuring environment. I mean, I know that there are certain RPGs where this doesn't make a great deal of sense. But there's so many, including Dungeons and Dragons, where it doesn't seem to make zero sense. It requires some contrivance, some acceptance of these strange turns of cause and effect, but there's a human being behind the player character who wants to join the game. And we, as fellow players, as the audience for that human being and for that character, are willing to make some accommodations to make that person appear because we like them, because sometimes we need another character in order for the story to have a meaningful progression. Sometimes it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the quest to continue if it's a quest for an arcane magic item, if there are no longer any more arcane casters, either hirelings, cohorts, or full-bodied player characters. Now, of course, in games with true play, like Ars Magica, or earlier editions of D&D, where you took for granted that you might start playing a hireling, you might start playing someone else's hireling. You might start playing Adraxius, the illusionist, who was a hireling of Bob the Barbarian. And you didn't think twice about it. Maybe you gave him a second name or a middle name, and you started calling him by that instead because now it was your character. I've had a similar experience myself when I walked up to a table and they were all on a skyship voyaging to vanquish some sort of horrible evil or to investigate the dysfunction of magic in the realm. I mean, I honestly don't recall, but I was told that here is this bugbear, which happens to be a hireling, which happens to be a cohort of one of the main characters, one of the main wizard characters. He's tamed this bugbear through many years of dominate person and charm monster. This bugbear has become a cohort, a friend to this wizard. So here is your new character. And then they handed me a sheet, and I said, "Oh, okay." This is a very old school, like BX or Holmes or even White Box game with some AD&D add-ons. And me, being a 19-year-old college student in the year 2001, I said, "Okay," and I looked at my character sheet and I started playing. I took that for granted. That, I was walking into the game, I was the guest until I had earned a place, and there was not a moment where a new character could show up necessarily, and that was really the game master and the group's prerogative when I could introduce a real character that I had rolled. And so I said, okay, all right, I'll play this character. I mean, in the same way that when I decided to play a Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, I recognized that the character that I was going to be handed was named Kyle Katarn. It seemed like a cause and effect kind of thing to me, that I'm entering into a world that other people have invested a lot of time and effort into. So naturally, I'm going to be a little bit accommodating to their point of view, to their privilege as creators of that world. That goes for the players, the person who tamed that bugbear, and for the game master who created the skyship and the conflict that these characters now found themselves immersed in. So it just comes as a real surprise to me as I'm starting to take part in the Twitter world, which I am now a Twitter person, and I now have a Twitter identity, which I'm going to put on future videos for you to take a look at, and I'll put in the description below if you'd like to follow me right now. Fair warning, of course, given the nature of Twitter, I do have some positions on some issues going on in the hobby and also outside the hobby, which could be construed as politics. But needless to say, as I've begun to take part in this world where people speak their mind, there's such an overwhelming number of people who are recognize it as almost a default to postpone their D&D session, to cancel it altogether when a minority or something like half of the players are not able to attend, the people that you were expecting to come. And it's just a real surprise to me. And this is what I'm going to start talking about, is some constructive sort of things to say to people with this frame of mind, and some points of view to refute this idea that canceling the session altogether is maybe not the greatest of ideas. But I'm going to take a look at chat right now because I think it's important to involve you, the audience. Okay, so suffice it to say, we do have 7 people watching right now, which is not a landmark, but it is about middle of the road for my channel as far as people who are really excited to tune in right now for what I have to say. And so I have to say thank you, because it means a lot to anyone who has subscribed to alerts and so on. I'm starting a second channel for RPG a Day this year, which is going to be called The CGA Speaks. I will put a link in the description below after the stream to direct you to that. So day one of RPG a Day will be here on the main CGA channel. CGA Speaks will carry day 2 and 3 and so on. There might be highlight videos or extra special days of RPG a Day which find their way into the main channel. But the idea is that the more prepared content, the stuff that I really want to own as my brand and that I've spent a lot of time and thought on making sure the message is very clear and the Socratic questioning of community is both fair and as uplifting as possible remains on the main channel, if you will. So that's how the two channels are going to go. So I'm seeing a lot of people who say, "Oh, I can't find people who can commit very well to RPG sessions, and I've had to cancel, I've had to postpone because so and so couldn't come for the day." And it's often in the context, 100% of the time, it's in the context of D&D or Pathfinder. These sorts of exploration-based RPGs, these quest-based RPGs that are very focused on the goal, on the challenge. Can you achieve the challenge? Is often the conceit of the campaign. And in those contexts, people still say, well, Jim Bob couldn't come today, so we're going to postpone the game altogether. And I think, well, what about the people that are able to come today, that have made time out of their schedule to come today and want to play D&D, who want to play Astonishing Swords and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, who want to play Pathfinder 2 or Packmaster 4th or 5th edition, or whatever sort of fantasy RPG that's really focused on a challenge, a central quest, and perhaps an exploration environment that's saying, hey, player characters, where are you going to go today? How are you going to handle these challenges that are in front of you tomorrow? Or how are you going to get better at handling challenges? What upgrades are you going to seek that will lead you to challenges? That's the paradigm that I'm usually used to where these people are saying it. Of course, in Star Trek, you could come up with a really character-focused world. In Traveler, where I'm playing, some people might own the ship, or there might be a strong feeling of companionship, where to not know how so-and-so would react to the new challenges, to the new life form, to the possible sentient rights of the new life form, might be a breach of their consent as a choice of words. I have to pick one word for what it is. If we were to move on without this person, it might be a breach of consent to move on without finding out how this person feels and allowing their character and their character's reaction to play out what they see and witness as this new event in the story occurs. But that, to me, is not necessarily all forms of RPG. And in fact, most forms of RPG to me, or rather the often the default state for a pickup game with people whom I do not trust, is an exploration dungeon crawl, a quest to go get the thing or vanquish the bad evil dude. If I don't know if you're not going to come or not, I'm just going to play it pretty straight with a pretty straight rising action to the climax, and then an Act 2 with a lot of action, and an Act 3 with a denouement and lots of rewards. After we played together for 12 sessions, 20 sessions, I may feel a feeling of trust where my prep that's invested in the sessions is worthy and worthwhile. I might feel ready to move on to something which is more centered on the stories of the player characters. But my experience as a game master is that, about 40% of the time, even the people who really like me as a person, even the people who really like the game that we're playing together, who like the system that we're playing, 40% of the time, even the best people don't show up. So if 40% of the time, one person of 4 doesn't show up, let's just multiply that. So guy number 1, 40%. Let me just see which hand is pointing. Okay, so then 60% of the time, he's good to go. But then 40% of those times, one of the other 3 people might not show up. So 0.4 times 0.6 equals 0.24. So 0.24 of the time, one or more of the other people won't show up. And the probabilities are more complicated than this, but let's just play with that for a moment. So 0.36 of the time, it looks like we won't be able to play if we follow that regime. And then 0.36 of the time, there's 2 more people. Maybe guy C or D can't show up in that 0.36 of the time. Let's say 0.4 of the time, guy C can't show up. So 0.4 times 0.24 equals 0.048 if I'm doing my math correctly. So now we're below 20% of the time that we're going to have the session. And that's with 3 players. And the 4th player is going to bring it even lower. If you're willing to cancel based on last minute appearances, that is going to reach a point of diminishing returns. Now, maybe the probability that I just talked about, 0.4, that so-and-so is going to cancel at the last minute, doesn't apply to every single person. Maybe it's a lower probability in general for your game. It could be 0.08. Needless to say, though, the more people that you are willing to cancel the game for, the more number of bodies that you, as a game master, require to feel like it's going to be a worthwhile session, the more likely that it is that you will have no session at all. And if you have no session at all, you don't get any experience with the system. You don't get any kind of compounded confidence in how the system works. You don't develop deeper person-to-person relationships with the people who are ready to play that day. And those are all huge opportunity costs to playing in that particular way. Now, I haven't talked about how there's questions of loot and experience points and the possible unfairness to people who aren't going to be there today. I did talk about how if something's really important to a particular character, how it's maybe their call. You know, Hermione loves house elves. And so if it's a question pertaining to house elves, maybe we should let Hermione witness and play out the events. But I haven't talked about more generic situations where there will be treasure acquired, there will be experience points, there will be pivotal turning points in the story to which a character might not bear witness. And my thoughts on the topic are essentially that the enhanced agency among the people who can attend the session, the enhanced investment in what will happen next in the narrative, has got to count for something, in the sense of that if you did decide to show up and there are fewer people who are going to have a say in what happens next necessarily, then that's got to be considered as a net positive for the people who are attending. Now, of course, that conference call feeling where everyone who is there at the table and is deciding how to pursue a given quest, how to pursue a given course of action, how to morally consider a given mission, whether we should give back the talisman of Astaroth to the priests of Nenquiel or keep it to ourselves. Those sorts of discussions are, of course, valuable in a way that might elevate them for the people whom are at the session. This isn't to say that those sessions aren't better when more people are there. There are more voices in the room can bring about a whole different feeling. But the feeling of fewer people participating and having a great time together has got to have some value. So I'm going to read some comments. I'm going to catch up with Stream Chat here and kind of get a baseline of how other folks are feeling. So Finulf says, ooh, advice for players who are very infrequent but yet still very welcome by the entire group. Well, That's an interesting. I'm going to put that on my agenda here, and I'm going to read the rest of Stream Chat, and these will be the next agenda items. What? When do you cancel? All but two come? When do you run for one person? I have the 4 to 8 routinely play a week. Okay. All right. So that was Mew Thou May. Okay. And Fanul says, I have had to treat them as a guest star who often wanders off during the campaign. Shrug emoji. Not wrong. And so Nick LaRocco says, what if you threw an RPG game and no one showed up? I usually cancel a session if half or more of the people don't show up, as a rule. Okay, so I'm going to talk specifically about Fanulf's talk. And by the way, go ahead and give me some feedback on how I'm pronouncing and whether this is accurate. So the person who is very infrequent and is still very welcome. My take on it is that instead of a guest star, one way to look at it is that they may be a background character, is to, if they really are well liked by the rest of the group, as in everyone's really anticipating that this character is showing up, is that if they show up often enough to devote a little bit of time to asking them, is to consult with them and say, all right, how do you want us to handle when your character is not present? Are they there? Are they attending to things like civilians that are in distress? Are they consulting with the local community? As to, when you're not present, you're still going to be a resource to your fellow characters. Everyone has a strong affection for this character who's here together with everyone. And the people who are able to show up more often are thinking of you. And to ask them and to consult with them about, like, all right, well, what is it that you become when you're not able to be here? So this requires, of course, a recognizance from the person who can't come all that often to be able to recognize that, one, they can't come all that often, and that, this is sort of on them. And they have to recognize that. But at the same time, everyone else has to recognize and not be very resentful and say, we love it when you can come. We like your character. Your character is along for the quest. And so we want to find a way to acknowledge that. So given that, what are your options? And to kind of feel that out from there. And to have that sort of conversation. It's worth the time because this person is a member of your community as a group. That's basically what I have to say, is that even though this person can't come all the time, it's worth 10 or 15 minutes to talk to them with everyone there about what would they like about when they're not there. And, you can preface this. You can say, like, maybe this person can't come until later. Maybe they're going to be late. Maybe they're going to be here next time, but they couldn't be here this time. You can have that conversation at the tail end. It's like, next time, everybody, let's give some thought to how James' character can be in the story, and let's ask James what he would like for his character when he can't be here. Let's ask Sheila, what is her character up to when Sheila cannot be a part of the session? Because I really like it when people come. Personally, like, this is me speaking as CGA, has this guy named Jay who lives in Michigan, somewhere out there. I really like it when somebody shows up who doesn't show up often. Like, it's a real source of joy for me as a human being. So, having conversations about, like, okay, what do we do when you're not here, is totally on the table. Okay, so let's talk about Mew without May. And so the question of, like, all but two come, I think, is the idea. So the two that came, why can't they have an adventure? And it's sort of like, if that's a frequent occurrence, if that's sort of something that is expected or a common part of your world in a meat space RPG game or an online one where you can't find a pickup person or a fill-in, uh, what do you do? And my answer is mostly to kind of have a fallback, which part of that is on the GM's side, is what does the session look like when there's only two player characters? Because I really enjoy running sessions for two player characters. That's one of my. It's honestly really fun. I like it a lot. Uh, it often ends up being more about the personal stories of the two characters that are there than it does have to do with the main thread or the super quest that happens to be occurring, and that's absolutely fine. Um, what do I do? I mean, I want to play an RPG most of the time, and that's kind of how I feel about it. Is that uh, giving ground on that? I mean, in a tactical perspective, also, if it gets down to two people besides the GM that can come, and everybody else can't come, and you cancel, then there's a sort of moral hazard that develops where it's like somebody might only kind of want to come, and they might say, "Oh, I can't come today," and they're trying to push the count of people that can come down to a certain level. You, as a game master, it's often very incumbent upon you to be the person who can come. Full stop. Period. End of sentence. Like, you need to push everything out of your schedule to be the GM and to have an 80 to 85% probability that you're going to be able to run the session on a given day in order to offer that session to other people. And I've found that people can abuse that sort of threshold. I've tried it. I've really tried to explicitly use the same sort of threshold of like, well, if only so many people come, we will cancel. And I've found throughout my gaming life that it seems like it's not really an overt abuse, but that gets taken advantage of. Or you get taken advantage of. The people who can come and want to play more often, they get taken advantage of, frankly. Um, that's what I have to say about it, is that it's just like the people who can't even be there are somehow able to take advantage of and abuse the scheduling effort that the other people have made. I just I'll level with you. I just don't like it. I don't like that sort of control that other people can put over me. Because I really want to have some fun times escaping into another world. Um, and I'm fortunate enough that most people come to the game that where I'm playing right now, both as a player and as a game master. We don't have that problem right now in the online world, but I mean, frankly, it's an issue. And the less frequently you play, if you've agreed to an every other week game, if you've agreed to a once monthly game sort of situation, that gets more and more because you will cancel it because a couple people can't come, and now it'll be a month since you've played the game that you're invested in. And one of the alternatives is to, of course, have a different adventure. So cultivating your own ad lib skills as a game master, cultivating your receptiveness to a game master, running an ad lib adventure for the characters that are there, that's a part of it. And I'm not gonna gild the lily a great deal when it comes to that. Is that part of it is just being receptive to the RPG session that you can get when people are flaky, that you didn't anticipate to be flaky. But I mean, I tend to assign a flakiness score to people pretty quickly. Like, how likely is it that this guy is really going to show up? I would say I assign that, and it's a changing score pretty often as I'm getting introduced to people in a meat space RPG game or otherwise. I just think, all right, well, this is the probability of this person to show up. This is how likely I'm going to plan or prepare plot points as a game master that are incumbent upon so and so being here. All right. So that's a little bit of what Nick LaRocca was talking about. If something important would to happen to someone's character and they don't show, I usually find a way to delay that thing happening until they show up. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing happens when they are able to be there. I mean, that's essentially the thing, is that if their character can't be an entity, with agency in the world, if the character cannot make choices apart from the game master, whoever is designated to play for them, which I'm not a huge fan of, by the way, then that whatever momentous occasions are occurring need to occur when they can be there. And that's why I'm a big fan of the phasing concept, in that they were somehow not there or really busy when the person who was playing the character couldn't be there. Their character is somehow really busy, and the NPC couldn't say hi to them, couldn't shake hands with them for the special accomplishment that they've been involved in as a member of the super quest, or so on. That meeting between the NPC and the player character is delayed in some fashion. It could be that could even, it's perfectly possible to have that take place in the form of like mail, like physical, like actual, like they get an envelope from the NPC, and like, I forgot to say thank you for what you did for us in the previous adventure, and I just want to say thank you, and I really need you to own up to the foul misdeeds of your ancestor, or whatever it might be. And to, the moment the character and the player return to the story, there's plenty of ways for this to kind of come right back into the forefront. All right. On the other hand, if I have a group I know will have frequent missing peoples, I will try to run a game where some people being away is easy to explain, dealt with narratively, an urban game. So that's an interesting thing, Nick, is that I tend to actually be more keen on classic dungeon crawls. When I know that a lot of people are going to be flaky, it's just I'm more keen on just doing a classic dungeon, or some sort of other exploration based. We're going into the hole, try and get the treasure, and the treasure that we get is the treasure that we got for tonight. The dangers that we face tonight, we use the resources that we have tonight for. Now, I might be a person who's, still more receptive to that classic, like D&D sort of style play, where it's like we want to try and get stuff. Maybe that's more part of my worldview than for other people, and I have to recognize that. But, when I feel like a lot of flaky people are on the horizon, I'm more inclined to go towards not necessarily an urban game where there's kind of more smaller particulates, but where like the hallway that the characters are going down is the same regardless of which characters are there. Um, there's still going to be a hallway even if your guy didn't come. Um, that sort of thing. It just, to me, to my mind, like one of the easier things to do is to just play the dungeon straight, and to allow the story to be whatever just happens. To the characters who happen to be there on a given night. Now, I know that this is not necessarily what younger people are showing up to play. Like, people want to play a D&D with a story and with a, like a that's going in a given direction and so on. And I do understand that. And I don't have a lot of practice with what the accommodations to be made. If that's the expectation that anybody who shows up wants to have that kind of session, uh, it gets more difficult, and that's frankly an argument to speak to what's good about the kind of classical exploration-based RPGs, where you're moving around the dungeon map, trying to get good stuff, maybe occasionally hear about a new plot hook and stuff like that. Uh, so Flame Zombie says, I usually have a cancel if 33% of the players are gone element. If the same people are gone multiple sessions in a row, I run without them. I mean that may work for you. It depends on what your threshold is. I mean, if you have like 5 to 8 people playing, then that starts to get a little bit, because so and so could come, and then Jane and Bang can come next week, and so on. And there's this kind of rotating situation where you might be in a culture of play or in a community where 33% of the, like, whoever can come, whoever wants to be in your game, the percentage of people who can be in your game is over that threshold. Like it may be college kids, it might be people who have like a given kind of working class schedule, retail jobs, and so on, or people who have graduation parties and sports practices in high school. And whatever your given threshold is that you set, the setting of the threshold needs to be carefully considered. That's basically what I have to think about, is that whatever the given kind of demographics of your player group has to be acknowledging um, whatever threshold you end up setting. And the other side of that is that certain RPGs are just fine with people not being there. Star Trek is really fine with so and so is just not here today because there's so many episodes of Star Trek where the character's actor just had other commitments or was on vacation this week or whatever it may be, and so their character was kind of not there. They might have been sitting there on the bridge a couple scenes, but they weren't in any of the exterior shots. They weren't a part of the action. And there are certain genres where it just works fine, regardless of how many characters are there, as long as there's someone who's capable of making a command decision. So, in Star Trek, sometimes Picard is absent, like a student who didn't raise their hand, if you recall from grade school days. But Will Riker is there, or Data is there at the beginning of the session. Maybe in later sessions, which are part of the same mission, Picard comes back, they arrive again on a shuttlecraft, or they beam back aboard from whatever conference they were a part of. And it's perfectly capable of progressing the mission in some fashion without whoever it is. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit more here. So Nick says, yeah, if someone doesn't show regularly, I don't count them a part of the regular group. Or, yeah. So, I mean, there's, of course, the extremely flaky people who kind of only barely come or never come. There's a guy named Josh. He was there like maybe once every 6 months that I can remember from an old 3.5 game. And, we all really liked him. But he kind of like needed to play hooky from various church activities in order to even be able to attend. Like his grandma hated D&D or whatever it was. He had social issues which prevented him from attending, particularly regularly. Yeah. So I'm going to pause for just a minute here. All right. Hey, everybody. Sorry about that. So Flame Dummy says, I'm 22 and I'm very much running that kind of story-driven D&D right now in Pathfinder 4th Edition. And I've got 6 people, and I find that those kinds of players are almost never flake. But I might be lucky. Haha. Well, good for you. That's basically what I had to say about that. Um, 6 players who are reliable is a pretty rare thing. It could be that they are coming in pairs. It could be that people have other associations which bring them back together. They're part of the same friend group for other reasons. Um, I'm not a particularly extroverted person, or, well, I am the kind of extroverted person. In America, we have this thing called the Myers Briggs, and I'm an ENTPJ, which means I'm that guy who says, "Well, actually," for whatever reason. And so, I'm willing to alienate people at the same time that I'm extroverted. And so, as the game master, who often the facilitator, the person who makes sessions happen, that also means that I'm not super excited. Like, I'm not on an interpersonal level. I'm not trying to be anyone's friend. Besides, like, if we are friends, like out of an organic association, a feeling of actual friendship. But I don't bend over backwards for people most of the time. I don't try and run a game just to try and become someone's friend. I'm running a game because it's my hobby. I like it because I want to share time with people. And that includes the people who I am friends with and I have a strong established connection with. But the people who I'm not friends with yet, I find a hard time being super great with. It's just, I mean, that's another story about like the saga. That's another video's worth of discussion about like how do you have games with people whom you are not close with yet, you don't have that sort of strong intimate connection where you smile and you're happy to see them. You really want to share food with them and break bread. You want to ask them how their new dog is doing, how their kid is leveling up in school, those sorts of questions. I'm often willing to play role playing games with people whom I don't really care what the answer to those questions are, and I'm not going to ask them until we are friends. Um, that's the sort of person I am. And I'll level with you that that's who I am. I don't really care, like, until we are close for some reason or another. Now, maybe for younger people, maybe if you are 22 and, maybe RPGs are more normal and it's easy, like, people who might be more casual are easier to get along with and you become friends with them by playing with RPGs with them. Back in the day, back when I was 22 years old, people, kind of average non-nerdy people would show up and they kind of like things, but they kind of have other things that they had to do. And so they kind of only come sometimes because they were too embarrassed to tell whoever it was that they would be bailing on that they had to go play D&D this week, that they didn't want to do whatever it was, and instead they wanted to play D&D. And so, I developed my own opinions on this topic. And it's maybe a generational thing. It's maybe a millennial Zoomer divide. And I'll just acknowledge it on just, outright verbal acknowledgement. So, Nick LaRocco says, I've become a bigger fan of the classic dungeon crawl. I used to think it was maybe trite, but I appreciate it much more. Yeah, for real. It has its virtues. In the first edition Player's Handbook, there's a talk about how it's like, call the other people who are going to play together. This is from 1979 or some ancient year, which I was never a part of. Like, call the other people who are going to come on the game night and talk to them about what the goal will be. And it's so charming imagining someone like talking on like a old phone, like boop 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 boop. Hey Joe, I heard you were gonna come play D&D with us. We're gonna try and get the super duper two-handed sword and the ring of awesomeness. I heard it's in the room of splashy demons. Do you think that's a good idea? Oh man,
I think I was really interested in what was going on with the quest with the Fey Queen. Could we check that out? Oh yeah, I mean we could go back up to level 1 and go down that corridor that we didn't ever go down before.
These are conversations which apparently were really common in 1979. Um, and it's inspirational to hear about like how other people approach the game in a whole another age. Um, and how do we apply it to our style of playing? Well, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but I mean, those lessons are there in the old books, even though there's other cringy elements. All right, so Flame Zombie says we're all college students right now, but we're definitely what we look forward to at the end of the day, at the end of the week, so we can afford to be tighter with the threshold. So yeah, that's the thing. Is just um, I lived in a different time where the party of the week, like because there was no Tinder, because there was no Grinder, uh, on the Friday and Saturday nights, there was a lot of tension about that. If you were looking for partners, I'll just use an innuendo there. You had to go to the thing where the partners would be, which was usually not the D&D thing. So the introduction of apps that mean that you don't have to go to a social thing that you might not really enjoy just for the sake of seeking out partners. That's probably really changed things for folks your age. And I will just acknowledge that things are different. And I'm an old man and I don't know everything. All right. So Nick and Flame Zombie are having a conversation, and it seems like it's a pretty good conversation. I'm only sort of a part of it, and I'm going to tag into the bottom of it and just kind of the most recent things. I'm going to wrap up the stream from there. I hope everybody's having a great night. I just thought that it was a really interesting topic to really engage with community and talk about frankly, including observing chat, because obviously I'm an old man. Things were different for me when I was encountering this more. Um, and I would encounter this more if I was trying to play a meat space game. Uh, there's a local microbrewery which I could easily run a 5th edition D&D game. It'd take a lot of pulling teeth to get people playing Star Trek or Zweihander or something that I really enjoy more. But there's a microbrewery that's like 5 blocks down the road, and there's a beer garden. It's really cozy. I love it there. Me and my son go for breadsticks and chili at lunchtime. And at nighttime, I'm sure that there's lots of younger folks from the local college who would love, an ancient crusty guy like me being their dungeon master, or at least be semi keen on it. And so I could find myself underwater in the same world once again. And I just, for the time being, as you guys may know, I'm just running the Traveler game Thursdays for 2 hours with our group, which has been great. But I know that these sorts of challenges are very close to my horizon. That I will find myself having to evaluate, like, what do I do when so and so doesn't come? I'm gonna have to ask myself those questions again. And one of the answers is to play the game without them, rather than to cancel it or postpone it altogether. Because the people who can come, they made time out of their schedule. They, they should deserve some acknowledgement. And also, as a game master, one of the skills that I think is worth advancing and worth developing is, how do I run a great session for fewer people? So there are RPGs that aren't as exploration based, where you don't get super underwater in a given plot thread or a given like location. Star Trek, of course, is one of the things I talk about here on the channel, where you can just beam up or fly away in your shuttlecraft. Where 2 or 3 hours is enough to kind of get involved in something and then get done with it. And so when so and so comes back for the week, it's easy to say, "Oh yeah, we did that thing without you." So of course, third edition D&D has very involved combats that take 2.5 hours, and that's where one of these questions really gets very exacerbated. D&D 5th edition, maybe a little less so, but the culture of play is really very focused on kind of comic booky end of the world sort of story threads where we have to stop the thing ending the world. It seems like that's an important thing. But there's a whole variety of RPGs, and some of them accommodate letting it go that someone can't come, and some of them are more challenging for that same question. And I think that's one of the things to consider as you're starting a new campaign is when you're thinking about what system to play and who is it that is interested in playing. That's one of the things that can enter into the conversation. So, I think that this has been a pretty lively Thursday night for folks. 28 millimeter RPG is maybe a person of a more refined vintage than myself even says, "Oh God, learning in 878 was hard. Trying to find someone to show you how to play back then." It's just and this is an interesting thing, is the willingness to learn to be like to show someone how to play, and also the willingness on the part of other players who are there to teach a newbie is not something which has always been constant. And I think that this is maybe one of the places where technology, or like maybe the march of progress, has won some victories, in the sense that because there are so many videos on YouTube that tell you how to play D&D or how to play whatever game, it's incumbent upon the people who are there, they have to like recognize like, yeah, I mean, if there's this video that somebody did for free or next to free, then maybe I should probably like be a little bit charitable. Like, this is the thing that brings me joy. Maybe I should share it with other people so that they can share in the joy of it. And I think that's one of the places where setting a great example, by being an influencer or being an RPG person who broadcasts whatever you want to call people like me, in spite of the spotty or non-existent financial aspect of it, it still is very rewarding to see people really get into RPGs, or to be excited about teaching other people RPGs. And I think that this is a place where we're in a great moment, in spite of how much fighting over some other aspects in D&D. There's been some recent fights about like art standards in the Dungeon Masters Guild. There's been some recent fights about whether stat bonuses for player character races are appropriate. And I have some things to say about that. I haven't said everything I'm going to say about that. But there are things that are moving in a cool direction, and like have successfully like moved to the next place, and they're now secure in this new cool place that they're in. And so it's important, especially in 2020 where like so much weird, horrible stuff is happening, to just acknowledge that we have gotten a lot of cool stuff in the RPG hobby in the last 5 years. It's really changed. And that's great. Anyway, I'm going to go to bed, and I hope everyone's having a great night. So as far as okay, so Finolf says regarding randos, that's a thing which I will talk about in another video, which is randos as a topic unto itself. I hope everybody has a great night. This seems like just a topic which is ripe for a strong live video, and I think we did get to that point. So I'm really happy for the lively chat which is going on right now. And I'm going to let that chat be for just a second by shifting over to the splash screen so that y'all can say goodnight to each other. Because I'm not the only person in the room. And that's one of the important things to think about whenever you're doing this hobby.